Any design is speech, whether it's painted, printed, or coded. It really is a First Amendment issue because the only way you could regulate the technology is by regulating the files. When you print it, you have to follow the rules. So you follow the rules, you put in the requisite amount of metal so that it's detectable, because there's an act that says the gun can't be undetectable by a metal detector. At the very minimum, I'm not saying this is good policy, but at the very minimum to be constitutionally sufficient, before an order is issued, there needs to be an emergency hearing where the person is brought before the court and provided a lawyer so that the state can prove their case. What universal background checks are about, people look at the name, they think it's a good name, right? They think, what could be wrong with that? This is what happens when you just want to do something. You get laws like the Patriot Act, which seems right now like a good idea, but a few years down the line, we realize it's a horrible erosion of their civil liberties. Again, a gun barrel expands and contracts and has to do the same thing every time in order to fire consistently and safely. Plastic doesn't have that type of elastic deformation. It has plastic deformation. Surprise. A felony for anyone who has a firearm accessible to a 17-year-old.
Whether or not the 17-year-old actually accesses it.
Right. And so what does that mean? That when you have kids, you no longer have the right to protect your family until they all turn 18? But be honest about any policy proposals you make, and remember that they'll be pointed against people the millions of people who have to use guns in defense of their lives in this country every year. Of the National Firearms Act, it is not easy to go out and get an automatic weapon. An automatic weapon costs about $10,000 minimum to get your hands on. What we're talking about here are semi-automatic weapons. Does it really matter on a principled level whether you have to use a lathe to do it or a 3D printer? It really doesn't. At the end of the day, this is a country where we've decided that people have the right to have effective mechanisms to protect themselves. People also have the right to make those themselves. Round magazines. Okay, that's the type of thing that I'm sure people like you often support, limiting to 10 rounds. When you are not planning on getting involved in a situation, what incentive do you have to bring spare magazines? The best way to do this is on the local level. So if your local police has reason to believe, if you've been arrested or reported multiple times,